So this is going to be one of the more important videos I've done because I'm going to get into the ego illusion, the ego trip, and I'm going to talk about this quest, know thyself. So many of us are on it. If you're watching this video, you've definitely put one foot on this path at least. And I'm going to talk about how misled we are with the ego illusion, how it takes us down a path of individuation on the surface, but actually it's the exact opposite path, and that's the paradox. The more we think we're becoming who we are, the more we're becoming exactly who we're not. So when we talk about the ego and we talk about, who are you? On the surface of it, it looks like we're on a path of individuation, becoming an individual. And so we talk about my beliefs, we talk about my personality. Maybe I'm an introvert, and that makes me unique, and it makes me stand out from a crowd. And we talk about even my body and my brain. And so the whole ego trip seems to be leading us down a path where we're becoming more and more of an individual. And what I want to point out in this video is that that's absolutely not true. It's actually taking us down a path where we're becoming more and more of the collective. We're losing our true individual self and becoming more of the collective. So I talk about this 70,000-year-old program in our skull and how humans, Homo sapiens, stood out. And we won this battle of evolution because we had some tricks, some cognitive tricks that we were able to win the survival game by. One of these tricks, and I hint about it in a lot of my other videos, but I'm going to be very explicit in this one. One of these tricks is to turn an abstraction into a thing. And I'll tell you why that's a really good survival strategy. The philosopher Alfred North Whitehead actually called it the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. And the idea is that you're doing kind of a bait and switch. You're taking an abstract idea and buying into it as a concrete thing. William James talked about it as vicious abstractionist, vision abstractionism, I think it was. And so there have been a few individuals who have picked up this trick. And whoever talked about it, and of course the ancient, this is what the Buddha talked about when he was talking about the no self idea. It's the same idea. It's misplaced concreteness, and what you're doing is you're taking something that's continuously flowing abstract idea and turning it into a concrete thing, and that's the illusion of the self. But what I want to talk about in this video is how that creates the sensation of an ego, because the ego is nothing more than it's a continuous flowing set of ideas and perceptions and thoughts, but then we do this misplaced concreteness fallacy. We actually think it's a thing, but the real paradox is we think it's a thing that makes us individual. And the very fascinating thing about this mistake is that actually we're far more ant than we are ape. And so I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction, and I'll come back to it. So when we look at this human evolution, we see humans really are unique. We're the only species that has crazy numbers in terms of population. I mean, 7 billion people. And we have these cities, and there's only one other species that comes close to this on the planet, and that's actually ants. And so you look at ant colonies, and there's some very similar not coincidences, but some real interesting similarities between humans and ants in the way that we create these huge numbers of ant colonies. If the aliens are checking us out, it wouldn't surprise me if they noticed us and put us in the same category as ants, because we become very hive-like, we become very organized, and then we have warfare, and we becomes very busy the more we populate. And that's why, you can feel it. And it's very easy to play the us versus them game. So ant colonies can get into wars, and they use pheromones, and we use language. So it's a little bit different. And to be fair, human beings are playing the game at maybe what we would call a more sophisticated level. But to get back to this, this mistake that we make, you see it at two levels. We make the mistake, this misplaced concreteness, we make the mistake when we think that we're becoming an individual, but we also make the exact same mistake when it comes to the ant colony. And in other words, we turn into nations and countries, and that's what human beings are doing. We not only buy into this abstract ego as a thing, but we're doing it on a much more collective level. We believe in nations, we believe in countries, we believe we've taken the earth and we've divided it up into all these, we've drawn lines in the sand around the globe. And it's exactly what ant colonies would do. And the mistake, of course, is to take these abstract things like nations, and we've talked about them as things. So we've taken an abstract idea and now bought into the concreteness of it. And so you can kind of feel this right now. In other words, one of the things I talk about on my YouTube channel, one of the things I talk about when I get interviewed for podcasts, I've just done a bunch of different podcasts lately, is this question, know thyself. Well, who are you? And you start asking yourself, well, am I an ego? And you may discover that actually you're not your thoughts, you're not your beliefs. Well, where did those thoughts and beliefs come from? Well, they came from the hive mind. They came from the collective. They came from an even bigger abstraction, society, culture, and all these defined all these aspects of the ego. So just take a day and ask yourself, like, all the thoughts going on in your head, did you invent any of those? Did you invent the language that you're even speaking in or thinking in? All the ways that you categorize the world, did you come up with any of those? Well, if you didn't, who did? So you didn't, the collective did. And then again, it's doing the same mistake in the same way that people are so convinced that there's an ego, they become even more convinced that the collective hive exists, the collective ego exists. And the real fascinating thing is to watch the tension between some of us. So the human experiment is a process where some of us are coming out of this. You start waking up, I'm not these thoughts. Well, they're just things that were, this program running in my head. Then you start on this path of actual individuation. Then you start discovering who you actually are. And you discover you're not this culture. You're not limited into some time frame where history defines who you are. And then the irony, of course, with this is that you realize who you are is very difficult to put into words, very difficult to talk about. Your true self, is beyond biology. It's beyond culture. It's beyond belief. It's beyond ego, and it's beyond the collective. But to get back to the tension that you might feel on this process, the more like you're kind of opening up from this cocoon, you might feel tension from the collective mind, the collective ego, whose sole job is to come back and press you back into this idea, put you back into the shell, put you back into the ego trip. And again, there's so many parallels between the individual process and the collective, because in my first book, The Neurotic's Guide to Enlightenment, I talked about this idea that the closest place to enlightenment is also the furthest place from enlightenment. And what I was getting at with that is, when you start to discover you are not your thoughts, the mind, the ego, actually has a mechanism that will crank up its belief systems to help reestablish and to help make this mistake again. So this fallacy of misplaced concreteness, it has a built-in backup system. When you start seeing that it isn't a thing, it's just an idea, that system kicks in, and maybe it's through anxiety, maybe it's through depression, but it reasserts itself and gets itself back online. And so you could see this happening as an individual, but you can also see this happening collectively. So the more you stand out from a crowd, the more you start questioning whether any of this ego stuff is real, the more you're going to feel that the collective is going to push back. The same way that your individual ego will push back, the collective will push back. And there's a very good reason for this, because they're both the same illusion.